I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, increasing hysteria in many quarters of the Jewish community in response to the Israeli cabinet's reneging on establishing a third egalitarian section at the Kotel, the Western Wall, and with its formally placing matters of personal Jewish status into the hands of the ultra-Orthodox rabbinate of Israel, which effectively means that the Orthodox rabbinate determines in Israel who is a Jew when it comes to marriage, divorce, and conversion of Israelis. And for all of this, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been viciously castigated for acceding to the demands of the ultra-Orthodox parties in his coalition government in order to prevent his government from falling. And as we're coming to you right now on JBS, Thomas Friedman of the New York Times has just published a scathing op-ed in which he claims Benjamin Netanyahu is the leader who burned the bridges to a two-state solution and to the Jewish diaspora at the same time. Friedman then quotes an editorial in the foreword saying, Netanyahu just gave the finger to a huge chunk of American Jews, and by doing so, dangerously upset the already precarious relationship between the Israeli government and the diaspora. This has suddenly become the mantra of many in the Jewish community who choose to portray these two events as stakes in the heart of the Israeli-American Jewish relationship. Now we are told by pundit after pundit, now Israel has gone too far. Now Netanyahu has proven to be an enemy of the Jewish diaspora, as well as being the reason there is no two-state solution. Well, personally, I see this situation very differently, but I'm very interested to hear how Israel's most eloquent defender of the State of Israel sees this issue as well as other issues confronting Israeli life and life on the American scene. Alan Dershowitz is Professor Emeritus at Harvard Law School. He's been a sterling champion of civil rights, human rights, constitutional rights for some 50 years. He's a gifted and prolific author of some 35 books, including such classics as Chutzpah, The Case for Israel, The Genesis of Justice, and Abraham, the first, but certainly not the last, Jewish lawyer. And Alan is currently working on his latest book, which, as he so often tends to do, addresses a hot contemporary issue. It's entitled Trumped Up: How the Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy. It's always a special pleasure for me to welcome Alan Dershowitz to JBS. Alan, thank you for joining us once again.
Well, thank you so much. I'm speaking to you from Martha's Vineyard, which is so beautiful, and this is where I work over the summer, so it's very nice to be here. Look, my wife and my daughter belong to Women of the Wall. I strongly support the creation of a conservative, reform, secular prayer space in the Kotel, but I think people who are blaming Netanyahu, including Tom Friedman, are just dead wrong. The blame for this goes to David Ben-Gurion, who back in 1948 made a deal with the devil in order to bring the Jewish people together in support of Israel. He turned over political issues to a religious group, which was a fundamental mistake. He gave the chief rabbinate, which is largely in the hands of a tiny percentage of the Jewish population, issues of marriage, divorce, personal property, a range of other issues that just don't belong to a religious group. I wish that David Ben-Gurion had followed the lead of Theodor Herzl, who said the rabbis ought to remain in their temples. Religion should be preached from the synagogue. If you want to accept it, you accept it. There should be no state compulsion. There should be no state pressure. There should be no state involvement whatsoever in religion. But putting the blame on Netanyahu is just foolish, because if Netanyahu had allowed this to go through, his coalition would fail, and Naftali Bennett would now be the prime minister of Israel, or somebody like that, who would be much, much further to the right of Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu wants to bring about a two-state solution. Others on the right do not. And so Tom Friedman simply misunderstands or deliberately misinterprets the complexity of the Israeli legal system. As Bill Clinton once said to me at a dinner, he said, the problem with Israel is it's a democracy, damn it. He said, I can easily call the leaders of other countries in the Middle East and tell them what to do, but I can't tell the Israelis what to do because it's a democracy. And it's a complicated democracy. And the American people can't tell the Israeli democracy how to deal with the Kotel. We can give them advice. We can help them. I've helped bring lawsuits on behalf of non-Haredi Jews in the Supreme Court. We can do all that. But in the end, the Israeli political system is what it is because of David Ben-Gurion and because of others of the founding fathers of Israel. And now Israel and the American diaspora are paying a heavy price for Ben-Gurion's short-sightedness.
You say it so beautifully and perfectly from my perspective. Alan, you know Israel very well. How different is Israeli life today than it was 2 weeks ago or a month ago or 6 months ago?
Not at all. First of all, in Tel Aviv, nobody could care less about the Kotel. They don't go to the Kotel. It's not part of their life. Tel Avivians live in Tel Aviv. They go for vacations in Eilat. They go to Cyprus to get married. Very few people who live in Tel Aviv are prepared today to be married by the Israeli rabbinical establishment. They don't want the rabbis to tell them who will get custody of their children in the case of a divorce. They would much prefer to leave it in the hands of the secular authorities and the secular courts. So the big difference between the United States and Israel is in America, we all get along, Orthodox, conservative, and Reform Jews. I go to an Orthodox shul because I love the chazan and the rabbi and Park East. My wife goes to a Reform shul. She goes to Central Synagogue because she loves the rabbi and the chazan there. And then we come home and we have a wonderful Shabbat or Rosh Hashanah dinner.
Yes.
I don't hate the Orthodox. They don't hate me because they don't tell me what to do. When I go to Borough Park, where I was born, of course I wear a kippah out of respect, but there's no law that tells me what to do. And in America, we get along very well. In Israel, there is a tremendous gulf between the secular and the ultra-Orthodox because the ultra-Orthodox tell the secular what to do. They tell them where they can pray, where they can't pray. They tell them whether they can keep their stores or go to the movies or play soccer or have soccer matches on Saturday, and it doesn't work. Roger Williams, when he created the concept of separation of church and state, he wrote about the garden and the wilderness, and he said, we need separation of church and state to protect the garden, to protect the church from the corrupting influences of the wilderness, and we see that happen in Israel. What is the most corrupt institution in Israel today? The rabbinate. So many rabbis have gotten in trouble. So many legislators who come from the religious parties get in trouble because when the state's involved in religion, then money is involved in religion. And when money is involved in religion, there's inevitably going to be corruption. And so the worst thing for Judaism, the worst thing for religion, is to have the support of the state. The best thing for religion is to have separation. What country in the Western world has more church attendance, more synagogue attendance than any other country in the world? America, because we have separation of church and state. What country in the world has the least synagogue attendance and the most hatred between the secular and the Orthodox? That's Israel. And it's a terrible thing. And if Israel were to have separation of church and state, it would be far better for religion, not better for the corrupt rabbis who line their pockets, but much better for the average Jew, the average rabbi, the rabbis who are now on the blacklist, some of my friends and your friends, who are regarded as insufficiently Jewish. Rabbi Avi Weiss, who's one of the great rabbis of American history, who's done so much for Soviet Jewry, so much when he protested the building of a Christian center at Auschwitz, so much for Jews in America. He's not regarded as Jewish enough to perform marriages or conversions or what else. And it's just a scandal. It's a terrible thing. But don't blame it on Netanyahu. Netanyahu is a victim of it, not the perpetrator.
Okay, you've described again a real-life situation so well, and we hear how angry you are at the political reality that right now grips the state of Israel.
Right.
There are people, however, in the Jewish community, whether it's Daniel Gordis, whether it's David Makovsky, who are suggesting that this reality should cause American Jewry to step back, to distance itself from Israel as a way of punishing Israel. I
Totally
have two
wrong.
questions
Dead
for
wrong.
Wait a minute.
That sounds like the BDS movement. You don't do that. You engage. When your loved one makes a mistake, you don't disengage. You engage more. I think we have to engage more. We have to become more involved. We have to try to influence the political system in Israel, which is broken. Not only broken over the issue of religion, but broken in so many ways. A majority doesn't rule in Israel. A minority rules, and that's because of the coalition system. Look, when Ehud Barak ran, he asked me for my advice at one point about this issue, and he pledged that if he was elected prime minister, he would form a coalition without the ultra-Orthodox, and it's very, very difficult to do. The left, in order to have a majority, needs to have the Arab parties on its side. The right, in order to have the majority, needs to have the Haredi parties on its side. It goes beyond the peace process. It goes beyond the religious issue. It goes to the very essence of what it means to be a democracy. And the coalition system in Israel is broken. I think everybody would tell you that. But how do you cure it? How do you fix it? It's very, very difficult to do.
I want to ask you, though, as you describe how you feel about the Orthodox rabbinate and the corrupt system.
Only some. I mean, I don't want to generalize.
I understand.
Rabbi Lau is just a wonderful, wonderful person. So many of the others individually are wonderful, wonderful people and great Jews. It's the system that I rail against.
Okay. I want to know if the system alienates you from Israel.
No. The system alienates me from the chief rabbinate. Mm-hmm. I'm not alienated from Israel. I'm as supportive of Israel as I've ever been, more so. Now that I hear that there are some like Rabbi Gordis who want to alienate, I'm going to redouble my efforts in support of Israel. I don't believe in punishing people you love, and I don't believe in punishing Israel. I've disagreed with Israel. I disagreed with its settlement policies from 1973. I disagreed with its occupation policies. I disagreed with many things. That doesn't make me not love Israel. I disagree with American policies. I love America. I'm a loyal patriot. I don't try to punish America. And I'm going to support whoever the American administration is. I'm going to support the Israeli administration. I'm going to be critical, but I'm going to support, and I'm not going to try to punish or take out my strong feelings on Israel's security. That would be a terrible, terrible mistake.
Okay. Alan, if someone said to you, look, Netanyahu should have let his government fall before he reneged on the Kotel and gave the power vis-a-vis conversions. Whether it's realistic or not, what would you say?
You have to ask. Look, I had a great friend in politics. Many of you know the name, Barney Frank. He was my friend since he's 16 years old. He was a friend of my first wife. Barney Frank always had a philosophy in government, and the philosophy was, if this is bad, is it worse than the alternative? What's the alternative? And you have to ask yourself whether the Netanyahu government would be worse than the alternative that would come in. Netanyahu has done a great, great job in bringing India closer to Israel, in bringing Eastern European countries closer to Israel, in bringing Africa closer to Israel. He closed the deal with the United States for billions of dollars worth of weapons. Let's give him his due. He's been a great prime minister. Is he perfect? Is anybody perfect? Other than my wife? No. We have to understand that in politics, you have to ask yourself, compared to what? Netanyahu government compared to what? Compared to a Bennett government? Compared to a Lieberman government? The alternative is not going to be a labor government. The alternative is going to be a movement further to the right, further away from peace, and further toward in increasing the power of the ultra-Orthodox on life in Israel.
Yes.
So I think that Netanyahu did the right thing in not allowing his government to fall. I'm not saying he shouldn't have made stronger statements or shouldn't have shown what he really believed. Those are issues that reasonable people could debate about. But I think allowing his government to fall would have been a big mistake.
I agree 100%. One more question about Thomas Friedman's article, his op-ed, regarding his take on the two-state solution. Alan, Friedman accuses Netanyahu of placing all the blame on the Palestinian Authority leader Mahmoud Abbas for the absence of progress in the peace process. And Friedman then says, Bibi masterfully distracted Trump by showing him a video of extreme statements by Abbas without showing him extremist actions by Israeli settlers. Alan, are the two comparable?
Not at all. It's apples and bicycles. Extremist settlers represent a tiny percentage, and they're not the government. When Goldstein murdered those Jews at prayer, he was despised. He didn't represent the government. Nobody's named a soccer stadium after Goldstein. Nobody's named a square after him. Nobody has ever in Israel ever honored people who have murdered innocent Palestinian civilians. There's an enormous difference. Look, I don't think all of the blame is on Abbas. I think Abbas is also a creature of his undemocratic constituencies. I had dinner with Abbas just recently. I think he'd like to be the guy to bring peace to the Palestinians and to bring a two-state solution if he could, but he doesn't have the real authority or legitimacy among his people. But I do think the vast majority of blame is on the Palestinian side. Look, the Palestinians had a chance to have a state in 1938, 1948, 1967, 1993, 2000, 2001, and 2008, most recently when Ehud Olmert, who, by the way, I spoke to today, who's out of prison, and I am so pleased that he's finally home with his family. He was a great prime minister and is a great man. Perfect? No. Flawed? Like all of us. But a great man. Palestinians had opportunities to have a state, and they never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. So to put the blame on Netanyahu is just wrong and ahistorical and plays into the hands of Israel's enemies.
Okay, Alan, I want you to comment on one other issue that's touched off a bit of a controversy in the American Jewish community, and which we're treating now in a panel discussion running on JBS. The Forward ran a paid ad by convicted Palestinian murderer Marwan Barghotui. There are those who believe the Forward did the right thing under the banner of freedom of expression and in response to what the Forward sees as an attack against the media by the current administration and in the Jewish world by Sheldon Adelson. Then there are those who believe the Forward crossed a line by giving a platform to a Palestinian murderer. Eric Yaffe argued that whether we like it or not, despite his being a murderer convicted of murdering 5 Israelis, including a Greek Orthodox priest, and despite his now serving 5 consecutive life sentences in an Israeli prison, Marwan Barghotui is one of the most important of all leaders to the Palestinian people, and that therefore the New York Times, on the one hand, and the Jewish Forward on the other, are correct in giving him a platform. What's your perspective?
Well, there are 2 issues. Number one, does the Forward take the position that it will publish any ad, and therefore it's a freedom of speech issue? If they take that position, then they have to prove it. Would they publish an ad by David Duke? Would they publish an ad by Patrick Buchanan? Would they publish an ad by me, for example, condemning the Forward for changing its policies and becoming far less supportive of Israel and a kind of creature of the hard left within the Jewish community? Would they do that? Do they really believe it's the First Amendment? And the answer to that, of course, is no. They would never publish an ad by David Duke, so it's not about the First Amendment. So the second issue is, if you're going to have discretion who you publish, is Barghotui somebody who you should be publishing? And I think the answer to that is no. It's part of glorification of terrorism and glorification of terrorists. So I think if it's a First Amendment ad and if they'll publish anybody, all right, but that's not their position. Their position is they're going to exercise discretion. And the exercise discretion, I think it's a mistake for a Jewish newspaper to glorify a terrorist, just like it was a mistake for the New York Times to publish Barghouti's piece, particularly without indicating that he was a murderer.
Yes.
And they had to make a correction. And that correction should never have had to be made. So I think, again, if you have discretion, you exercise your discretion in a way that doesn't include people like Barghouti. But if it's a First Amendment thing, then you publish everybody, including David Duke and Pat Buchanan.
And, by the way, Neturei Karta and Meir Kahane.
And Neturei Karta. Yeah, would they publish an ad by the Neturei Karta? You know, there's this character in Neturei Karta who claims to be a relative of mine. His name is Dershowitz. I suspect he is a relative of mine. And every time I go to an Israeli event, he's there, pronouncing his name Dershowitz very loudly to show how not all Dershowitz is a Zionist, how you can be a Dershowitz and be an anti-Zionist. As my mother would have said, it's a shanda from the Goyim. But so you can't protect your name, you can't trademark your name.
And what about Eric Yaffe's point? Whether we like it or not, Marwan Barghouti is recognized by by the Palestinian people as their leader, and if he's a leader, whether we like it or not, whether he's in prison or not, he has a responsibility. He has a right, certainly for the New York Times, to print an op-ed by him.
By that standard, the New York Times should have published David Duke because he was a leader. He got 45% of the vote for the United States Senate for the governorship in Louisiana. They should have published op-eds by Adolf Hitler, by Mussolini, by Stalin, by the current fascist leaders in Hungary and in the nationalist leaders in Poland and the Golden Dawn in Greece. This is hypocrisy. Look, Yaffe is a well-known hypocrite. He went after me viciously for who I defended, and I told him he should really read the story of Abraham defending the sinners of Saddam, and maybe he would take a different view about who lawyers should defend. So I'm not a fan of Eric Yaffe and don't take him seriously, but I do take Tom Friedman seriously, and I think he made a serious mistake in putting all the blame on Netanyahu.
Okay. I can't let you go without asking you, you've been courageous in your commentary on issues surrounding President Trump. You've maintained a liberal viewpoint with integrity, which has caused you to come under a great deal of criticism from many of your friends. Mm-hmm. My question now deals with the appointment of Robert Mueller as special prosecutor, ostensibly looking into whether the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government to influence the outcome of the election for Trump. In your mind, Alan, irrespective of who the special prosecutor is, was there, in your view, cause to appoint now a special prosecutor?
Well, let me start by saying I think the evidence is now pointing toward collusion. Certainly, we know that Donald Trump Jr. said, "I love it," when he was told that the Russians were willing to provide him with dirt on Hillary Clinton. I think that Hillary Clinton's campaign would have also been willing to get dirt on Donald Trump. I think that's the way politics works.
Of course.
For better or worse. I do think there was collusion, and I think there ought to be an independent commission, bipartisan, nonpartisan commission, like the 9/11 Commission established by Congress, to look into the big picture of collusion. But collusion is not a crime. I'll go so far as to say this. If President Trump, as a candidate, had called Vladimir Putin and said, "Hey, Vlad, I'm a deal maker. Let's make a deal. You help me get elected president legitimately by giving me dirt on my opponent, etc. You just help me become president. I'll call off the sanctions." That would be terrible. It would be a horrible, horrible thing, and it would undercut American democracy. But I can't find a criminal statute that it would violate. People point to the election laws that say you can't accept political contributions from foreign governments, but getting information is not a political contribution. It's protected by the First Amendment. So I think it was a mistake to appoint a special counsel, because special counsel is supposed to look into crime. This is not an issue of crime. It transcends crime. This is not cops and robbers. This is something more fundamental, and we should have had a nonpartisan commission open to the public, looking into the whole range of issues involving the Russians trying to influence the outcome of this election. Remember that special counsel operates behind closed doors, front of a secret grand jury. We're never going to learn the evidence. He'll come out later on, maybe a year from now, say, indictment, no indictment, that's the end of it. Or he'll issue a report, but the report will be one-sided because the special counsel only hears one side of the case. He only hears the case for prosecution. Mm-hmm. The grand jury never hears the exculpatory evidence, whereas if you had a bipartisan commission, everybody would be able to see the evidence and judge for themselves. So I think the appointment of a special counsel was a mistake, and I think there ought to be an independent commission appointed to look into the very, very serious issue of Russian efforts to influence the outcome of this election.
Alan, I can't thank you enough. I love talking to you. I love your perspective, and you always make us think. How's the book coming? Trump
Good.
up.
Done. It's done. I literally 15 minutes before when your people called me, I said I need another 2 minutes. I literally sent the last conclusion off to the publisher.
I'm thrilled for you.
Today, just before I spoke to you. It's going to be both an ebook and a regular book, and it should be out in a month. It'll be out before the end of the summer, hopefully, and it's called Trumped Up.
Okay.
How the criminalization of political differences endangers democracy. And it's not only about Trump, though. It's about how the people who were yelling, lock her up against Hillary Clinton were doing the same thing. The people who went after Tom DeLay, the people who went after Senator Stevens, the people who went after the governor of Texas, the people who are going after Bob Menendez today. I think we're seeing, and the people who are going after Benjamin Netanyahu, we're seeing too much attempt to paint our political enemies as criminals, and that's really a great danger to democracy.
Alan, best of luck with the book. When it comes out, we'll talk about it. But again, thank you for always making time for me.
My pleasure. I always enjoy talking to you. Thanks.
Thank you, my friend. Bye. The thoughts of Alan Dershowitz, who's currently working on his latest book entitled Trumped Up: How the Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy. I also want to say, purely for myself, I found Thomas Friedman's piece in the New York Times to be offensive. It presents his analysis and opinion as if it is fact. It is not. He relies on one Israeli source to prove his point. And he has joined in the hysteria that has erupted over this issue, which is an embarrassment of ignorance and self-interest inside the American Jewish community. Every Jew, Orthodox or not, should be deeply troubled by Israel's parliamentary political system, which enables small ultra-Orthodox parties to wield disproportionate power, which they use to further their goals. And as much as I disagree with their goals, they have, however, a right to their goals and to their view of Judaism and what they believe God commands. You know, we talk all the time about the right of people to believe differently than we do and to lobby for their beliefs, unless they're Orthodox. There are no villains here, only Jews with differing understandings of what the Torah is and what Sinai was. And the problem is, those with a fundamentalist view of Torah currently have power in the coalition government system of the State of Israel. No American Jew should feel that Israelis have rejected non-Orthodox Jewry. Israelis simply don't feel the urgency of the issue. And the only way things will ever change in Israel is for those who see Judaism differently continue successfully to lobby for their perspective. And maybe one day, Israelis will either reject their parliamentary system, or perhaps enough Israelis, including non-Orthodox Jews who make Aliyah, will vote in Israeli elections and create a coalition government that does not need the ultra-Orthodox parties. In the meantime, the truth is, nothing's changed in the State of Israel. And when any of us visit Israel, we'll virtually never experience this issue throughout our travels in the Jewish state. As always, my thanks to our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS's Associate Director, Dara Golub, editors Dennis Golan and John McDevitt, and to the producers of this edition of In the News, Carol Lilienthal and Jan Weiss. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.